This is April.
And this is Tiffany. And you are now listening to the Tea of Life podcast.
Hey, welcome to our podcast today. It's Easter weekend, the week that we are recording this, and we've been reflecting on Stations of the Cross. We've been reflecting on what does it even mean for us as Christians to walk through this weekend. And I know that some of our listeners out there are going to maybe from different faiths, and that's great. I mean, that would be awesome. And so whether you participate in Easter or not, we'd still like to know. But one of the things we all can relate to, Christian or not, I think, is forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the big elements, I think, of this weekend, right? Wouldn't you say so?
Right, because we as Christians, we look at the forgiveness from a theological standpoint for the fact that Jesus died on the cross. We believe that Jesus died on a cross for our sins and rose again. And we believe that because he predicted his death and resurrection, and he actually pulled it off. And so,
yes.
Right. And so we believe that Jesus died on a cross for our sins, which means that he died on a cross to forgive us. And so there's like this saying that says, we forgive because we're forgiven. I think that, that's kind of like a little cliche that some Christians kind of say. And we all know that there are those Christians who aren't very Christian-like, who maybe some of the people listening are not Christians because of those people.
True.
Because of some unforgiveness. And so they look at other people who claim to be Jesus followers, but they're not very forgiving. So we wanted to look at this from not only a theological standpoint, but also like a human standpoint for forgiveness. We forgive because we're forgiven, not to kind of quote that, but we need to forgive whether we were forgiven or not.
Right, because it does so much physically. If you harbor unforgiveness in your body, there's medical things that can happen. There's just things, I'm not talking about that. I mean, that's one aspect of it. But the point is, forgiveness is for you, the person that's been wronged, if you will. You have to forgive because the person that wronged you, air quotes, wronged you, walked away and forgotten all about it. They're probably not even thinking about the fact that they hurt you or caused harm or something. They're gone. As our pastor this weekend was talking about, they're just skipping away, like do-do-do. They don't know. I thought it would be great if Tiffany read some of an article that she wrote, a life article that she wrote back, was it last year? Yeah, last February. So we'll post it up on our site and you can read it. But I think this is what we wanted to kind of pinpoint today, talk about.
All right, so I have a sister, and she lives in South Georgia, and she attends a church there that she's attended for, I don't know, forever, for as long as I can remember. And the lead pastor there and his wife are also great and longtime family friends. And he spoke on forgiveness, and this has been over a year ago. But my sister actually asked for his notes, and she did a lot of highlighting and stuff, and then she shared them with me. And I don't know, maybe she thought that I needed to practice some forgiveness. I'm not really sure, but I'm really glad that she did. And when I went through those notes, I thought they were fantastic. And so I asked for permission to actually write the life article a little over a year ago. And so I wrote the article about his sermon. So when he was beginning his sermon, he started out with a statement from Nobel Peace Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And Desmond Tutu is known for his work as an anti-apartheid and human rights activist. So Archbishop Tutu was speaking during the aftermath of the devastation of the apartheid in Africa. And the simple words that he spoke during this time were very profound and actually stand true still today. So what he said was, in quotes, "Without forgiveness, there is no future." And so as my sister's pastor continued, he took the quote even further to say that without forgiveness, there is no freedom. Without forgiveness, there is no recovery. And without forgiveness, there is no healing. And so I think that the word possibilities to ending this quote are probably countless. So without forgiveness, there is no blank. You can fill in the blank. So I was curious to know exactly what forgiveness meant. So I looked it up, and according to the Google Dictionary, Forgiveness means to stop feeling angry or resentful towards someone for an offense, flaw, or mistake. We always think that the person who wronged us, maybe they
intentional.
meant to harm us. It also means to cancel a debt. So whenever that happens, then that means that the person is it no longer owes us anything. We canceled that debt completely. And so we can no longer hold the offender in contempt of their offense. So he went on to say that forgiving someone is like putting a nothing owed stamp on a debt. I just picture that.
I like to borrow that stamp.
I know, right?
Mortgage.
Although I know exactly. I'm thinking, but I'm thinking like I'd like to borrow the stamp and go and like put it on somebody's forehead and just turn around and walk off.
Get that stamp.
I know, right? So, we think, oh, let's forgive. It's easy, and we can sit here and we can say, oh, you need to forgive. And we have no idea what you've gone through. We have no idea the devastation that our listeners have experienced. And forgiving may be something that may be absolutely unattainable in their situation. And I'm positive that if I found myself in their same situation, I would probably find it hard to forgive as well. So we totally understand the hardness that it is to forgive someone. So how do we forgive? Is it a mental state? Is it a heart thing? How do we forgive someone? And how do we know that we have truly forgiven someone?
That's a good question. I guess when you see them, it doesn't rub you the wrong way again. When you see them, you don't have that, I was going to say burp or vomit. And I know that you're like, why are you saying burp or vomit? It's like, indigestion, they don't give you indigestion. It doesn't come back up again. Sometimes if you haven't really forgiven them, something will come back up. But maybe if you see them and you're like, you're right, I am not irritated by your presence, then you know that you have totally forgiven them or something like that.
Yeah, there's a peace
question.
there. There's an unexplainable peace that you have for that person or for the situation that you know that it can be nothing but just forgiveness and release.
That's good.
You don't have to have any explanation for it at all.
Yeah, sometimes it's that act of faith that you might not feel that you want to forgive them, but maybe even just kind of saying it over and over, I forgive you. And then you just bringing it to the cross. You just bring it to Jesus. I mean, that's what, and you just trade it with God. I know it sounds easy, sounds kind of cliche, trade it with God, but that's what you have to do. You have to physically hand it over, and I think acting, you've seen people, or at retreats, we've talked about taking a rock and that rock kind of represents that wrong that has been done to you, and you throw it kind of far. And you just kind of that releasing, that letting go of that rock kind of is just a physical representation of letting go. So maybe it takes that, or maybe it's just you alone in a quiet room kind of meditating and letting go, or just picturing that person. I don't know. Put their picture up and just blow them kisses instead of throwing darts at them. I don't know. Whatever it needs to happen.
I think we can all agree, though, that it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
That forgiveness is hard. It's so hard. And it's especially hard when the other person has not come to you and asked for forgiveness. Like you said earlier, they may not even know that they've wronged you. But in the instance where you know that they know that you know that they've wronged you, that may be it may be harder to forgive in that situation.
Because when you are not forgiving towards somebody, and like we said, we know it's not easy, but they don't. It's not like you've got them in a vice. You don't have them in a grip. You don't have anything over them. You have yourself is in a vice. Yourself is in a grip.
Correct.
It's over you. So if you release that, then
you're the one that's
you're
going
the one
free.
That's going through you're the one going free. You're the one that was in the pain and the suffering, but now you release that.
Right.
And then it's like being super nice to them is like heaping hot coals on their head. You just be ridiculous. back before you went, if you know that they know that you know that they wronged you, that back and forth. If they're either not aware that they wronged you, or B, they are aware and they haven't yet come back to you. But if you are super duper nice to them, that's probably going to frustrate them more.
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that forgiveness actually begins with our mind. And I think that if we decide that we're going to forgive someone, and we can take it to the cross, we can take it to Jesus and say, I forgive them. You don't even have to tell that person that you forgive them. Sometimes it may not be safe to enter back into that situation to say, I forgive you for whatever. But you can tell Jesus, I forgive them. I want to forgive them. Or even be honest and say, you know what, God, I want to forgive them, but I can't. And just every day, God, I want to forgive them, but it's hard. I can't. And I want to. And eventually, I believe that you can get to okay, I am forgiving them state in your mind, and your heart still may be broken and hurting and devastated. But you can get to a point to where if you just tell that over and over in your mind, then your heart, I believe, will follow. And eventually your actions will follow. And it doesn't mean that you have to actually enter back into any kind of a situation that is harmful, but it's just releasing that debt that they owe you something, and you get to walk away and live the rest of your life as being you without any kind of chains holding you back toward that person and being attached to that person.
Then you are free. Like you said, you are free to be you. You are free to do you well. You are free to be the best you can be.
Right.
Because that's all we can do is be the best ourselves.
We probably know a little bit about what forgiveness is, but we need to also realize what forgiveness is not. Because I also think that we may be misinformed somewhat of what forgiveness is. Okay. But there's some things that forgiveness is not. And forgiveness is not denying any evil.
Right.
Forgiveness is not excusing any sin. It is not excusing any behavior, pretending that it never happened. That is not forgiveness. Covering it up, walking away, just pretending like it never happened, that is not forgiveness. Ignoring our personal pain and hurt is not forgiveness. We have to acknowledge that we are hurt in order to forgive. We have to acknowledge that pain. And then once we acknowledge it, then we can start to deal with it, and we can start to bring it to surface and start to get rid of that pain and start to heal. Because you just
said earlier when we were talking about ideas for today and what this weekend, Easter weekend, represents, and you're talking about freedom. And I was just reminded that forgiveness is freedom. It's forgiveness. When you give somebody forgiveness, you're freeing yourself. That person still has to deal with what they did.
Correct.
And they are going to deal that.
But you're not
on their
necessarily the one who has to inflict those consequences.
Exactly. That's between them and God. And we know
you
that.
You walk away, you are in freedom.
Yeah,
And they are left there stuck.
Right.
And they have to deal with the consequences.
Right.
So
but you're free. Yeah.
Right. So forgiveness is not removing consequences.
Right.
Forgiveness is also not allowing the abuse of any kind to continue. Doesn't matter if it's physical, mental, emotional, verbal, doesn't matter. It's not allowing, forgiveness does not mean that we have to allow that to continue. Forgiveness is not acting like it never happened, like we talked about before. And it's not allowing others to continue to abuse us in any way. So we can choose to forgive. We can choose even when the offender has not confessed and has not come to us to ask for forgiveness. We can forgive anyway. And John Calvin was a French theologian and pastor, and he stated that there are two kinds of forgiveness. One, where wrong is admitted and forgiveness is sought and granted. And the other would be the opposite, is when guilt is not admitted and forgiveness has not been sought. So sometimes when the latter happens, lies may be told to cover up the truth, And in some instances, the relationship may have to be cut off completely. So there's the hard work of reconciliation may not be worth it to the other person. And sometimes the other person may keep hurting us on purpose in order to gain or feel in control of us or the situation. And we can't allow that to happen either. We talked about boundaries last week and the week before. And we cannot continue to allow others to have that control over us.
Yeah. And so forgiveness isn't a one-time activity, it sounds like. You know, even if you have to be in a situation where you have to see that person who's wronged you, maybe you just, that's, you know, for whatever, family, job, you might have to be in their presence at certain times, especially around Easter. Maybe you're getting together at Easter. Yeah, you might have to remind yourself, I already forgave them. Or maybe you have to forgive them again. I don't know. So I like this quote. You say the hard work of reconciliation may not be worth it to the other person, and sometimes the other person may keep hurting us on purpose in order to gain or feel in control of us or of the situation. That's what you just said. When we experience times resembling the above mentioned, this is what you're going on in your article here, we need to remember that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same, and forgiveness should not be confused with reconciliation. Reconciliation does not have to happen in order for forgiveness to take place. Forgiveness takes place inside our body and depends on us. Reconciliation takes place outside the body and depends on both parties involved. Sometimes reconciliation is not necessary or recommended, especially when we feel threatened or unsafe. Reconciliation is not necessary for our own healing and should never be sought after if it puts us in danger of any kind, mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. I really like that. And then there's a quote from John Calvin where you say, forgiveness lets go of bitterness plus anger and refuses to let hurt dominate us.
According to Johns Hopkins Medicine, there is an enormous physical burden to being hurt and disappointed. Chronic anger puts you into a fight or flight mode, which results in numerous changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and immune response. Those changes then increase the risk of depression, heart disease, and diabetes, among other conditions. Wow. Forgiveness, however, calms stress levels, leading to improved health.
Wow. And that sounds like at the very end, your last paragraph, where again you just quote the John Calvin quote, we let go of bitterness and anger and refuse to let hurt dominate our lives. You said the hurt may still remain. We cannot and should not deny the pain. But what we do with that pain is what leads to our own personal healing process. So like you're saying, if we harbor it, there's going to be some negative medical conditions, consequences. But if we let it go, there's healing, there's health. So yeah, and like even at the end, I was thinking about, there's times where I've gone to counseling just to kind of get through stuff. It's like I need somebody on a professional level to talk me through some things, and that's been so helpful. And or going to your pastor, or going to a friend or a mentor.
Not someone who can't give you really good, honest,
right,
spiritual feedback. Because if you're just going to someone to vent and they're just listening to you, but they're
give you comforting lies,
right?
You don't want them. You want somebody
Exactly.
who may be giving you some unpleasant truths. Like when you try to go, I don't need to forgive that person, do I? And you're like, well, yeah, you kind of do. And not for their benefit. It's always for your benefit. It reminds me of this proverb. I have this book. I think there's a book of stories. A senior monk and a junior monk were traveling together. At one point, they came to a river with a strong current. As the monks were preparing to cross the river, they saw a very young and beautiful woman also attempting to cross. The young woman asked if they could help her cross to the other side. The two monks glanced at one another because they had taken vows not to touch a woman. Then, without a word, the older monk picked up the woman, carried her across the river, placed her gently on the other side, and carried on his journey. The younger monk couldn't believe what had just happened. After rejoining his companion, he was speechless. And an hour passed without a word between them. 2 more hours passed, then 3. Finally, the younger monk could contain himself no longer, and he blurts out, as monks, we are not permitted to touch a woman. How could you then carry that woman on your shoulders? The monk looked at him and replied, Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her? And it says, the simple Zen story is a beautiful message about living in the present moment. How often do we carry around past hurts, holding on to resentments, when the only person we are really hurting is ourselves?
If you like Tea of Life podcast and you've got 2 friends who want to create the life that they love to live, tell them about us. Find us on your favorite social media platform like Facebook or Instagram. Also, right now before you forget, go to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts and search for Tea of Life podcast. Hit the subscribe button and never miss an episode. Thank you for listening to Tea of Life podcast. We'll see you next Monday.